Heroin became my best friend, my significant other, and ultimately, my abusive domestic partner. We had a love-hate relationship. After a week or two of using, I felt trapped and scared. I experienced a moment where I knew in my heart there was no turning back. Heroin had total control over my life physically and mentally. Once that drug was in me, it told me what to do. I didn't take heroin. Heroin took me. 22-year-old Abby Zorzi isn't the only one to have struggled with a substance use disorder. She was just a regular high schooler with friends and a bright future in athletics. This was all before a Vicodin prescription following her wisdom teeth removal surgery led her down a dark path of addiction and shame. Just like her, 21 million Americans are struggling with substance use disorders every single day. Yet only 1 in 10 receive necessary assistance. Assistance that gave people like Abby the opportunity to proudly say, I am the face of addiction. Yet I am also the face of recovery and hope. And that last part is often forgotten. These people are not just their addictions, but so much more. We as a society fail to see that every single one of these 21 million addicted are human. Every single one of these addicts, junkies, users, and abusers are all human. Addiction doesn't discriminate. It picks from every age, race, and social standing. The unfortunate truth for many of these mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers is that society has stripped them of their humanity and thrown them in the garbage can. All because they had a lapse in judgment during hard times. We see that addiction is synonymous with filth. People who pass drug tests are clean because of this. How would you feel if the whole world saw you as filth? According to a 2014 study published in the Journal of Alcoholism, Clinical and Experimental Research, found that when people with a substance use disorder perceived rejection and discrimination, it increased their feelings of depression and anxiety. This is why, in order to assist our fellow humans in their darkest times, we have to destigmatize these individuals and restructure how society approaches addiction as a whole. In this speech, I will talk about the opioid epidemic and its devastating impacts on addiction in the US. Then, we will talk about the effects this disease has on our society as a whole. And then finally, we will establish your role in mitigating the stigma around addiction. Let's go back in time to the 1990s when pharmaceutical companies assured the populace that opioids were the addiction-free solution to pain. Widespread prescribing of addicted opioids hooked the working class, who found that when their tolerance increased, it was easier to just buy street drugs like heroin rather than pay for a costly prescription. Leading up to the epidemic, there were over 225 million prescriptions being issued a year, according to the CDC. Not a single one of those 21 million people addicted to this day thought of themselves as addicts when they first got their prescription for pain relief. But opiates stole their lives regardless. In the course of a decade, families have been torn apart. Brothers have been thrown out for being junkies. The breadwinners of the family suffering from withdrawals so terrible that they couldn't go to work to even fund their own addiction. Unlike the society that condemns and discriminates addicts, opiates do the opposite. To this day, they welcome Americans with open arms and sweet promises of bliss and acceptance. And in the end, that was the most dangerous thing about them. It took the Department of Health and Human Services 17 years to realize the dangers that opiates pose to society, largely because pharmaceutical companies like Purdue did everything in their power to cover up after they first found out that these drugs were being used within a year of the production of OxyContin in 1996. After almost 2 decades of allowing these fathers, mothers, and children to become dependent on these drugs, the government's reaction was to make them harder to get. This only exacerbated the issue, leading to an increase in black market sales in heroin, often mixed with powerful opiates like fentanyl, which is 100 times more potent than medical-grade morphine. In fact, a single grain of fentanyl in contact with the human hand is enough to induce overdose and death. This increase in the sale of fentanyl-laced heroin led to a 300 times increase in the yearly overdoses from 1980 to 2003, hitting rural settings the hardest. See, the reasoning for this can best be explained by two addiction studies using rats. As early as the 1970s, researchers knew that when rats were placed in an empty cage with a bottle of regular water and water laced with heroin, the rats would often become addicted to the heroin water and drink it exclusively until their inevitable demise. Dr. Bruce Alexander, as explained by Lloyd Setterer, MD, in the Psychiatric Times, looked at these studies and realized one fatal bias. These were not rats living happy and free. All they had in their tiny little lives were two bottles. One bottle of water and one that promised them freedom. Dr. Alexander took this study and he expounded upon it. Instead of a bare cage with two bottles, he made heaven for rats. Wheels to run on, food to eat, other rats to socialize with. When Alexander repeated the study with his newly made rat park, he found that the rats actually preferred the untainted water. And when rats did consume the laced fluids, not a single one ever overdosed. This study shows exactly why rural areas and communities on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale picked up heroin so fast. If you feel trapped in your town, your job, your streets, you are more likely to seek an escape. From 1999 to 2017, more than 702,000 people have died from seeking escape. But how can we stop our own friends and family from being stuck down the same dark path? Well, research indicates that stigma plays a vital role in whether or not these addicts seek help for their addictions. One NCBI study found that individuals with substance disorders who perceive high stigma in their community were less likely to have sought and used treatment services. The likelihood of treatment decreased with increased stigma perception. The relation suggests that perceptions of stigma represent a potential explanation for the underutilization of addiction services among those in greatest needs of treatment. Although this study focuses on alcohol disorders, it can also be applied to other substance use disorders, such as those involving the use of opiates. In fact, Michael Botticelli, the former director of White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, sent a memorandum to heads of executive departments and agencies in 2017. In this, he explained how researchers found even highly trained substance use disorder and mental health clinicians were significantly more likely to assign blame and believe that an individual should be incarcerated instead of given therapy when the subject of a case study was referred to as a substance abuser rather than a person with a substance use disorder. The kick is that both these words describe the same affliction. But in a public perception study, the term abuse was found to have a higher association with negative judgments and punishment. These negative attitudes among health professionals and people have been found to adversely affect the quality of care and subsequent treatment outcomes of those suffering from substance use disorders as a whole. In order to take a step forward in the direction of solving this issue, we as a society must change our perception of these mother, fathers, sisters, and brothers by using language that helps, not harms, these Americans, and by actively seeking to make personal connections with those afflicted. Simply referring to these people in need as substance users instead of abusers, and seeing the person behind the addiction helps move our society in the right direction. When you see a person with a substance use disorder and think all they are is a junkie, you are marginalizing them to marginalizing a whole life of experiences and values. America as an institution must seek to connect and assist these harmed peoples instead of locking them away. Out of sight, out of mind only hurts those that need our help most. For all these reasons, I urge everyone here today to go out into this world armed with that knowledge, and to be the start to reducing stigma of these disorders. If we all help to educate our peers and children that substance use does not make you a lesser human, then we can improve the lives of all afflicted by this disease. If we cannot, as a society, change the way we look at the disease of addiction, we will never help those 21 million addicted break free from their vices and soar free.